talking about partnerships, how to, I guess, deal with issues within partnerships, and then kind of avoiding those if you can.
Yeah, I'm going to try to give you the pitfalls of putting a partnership together, the common questions you're going to have whenever you're putting one together, and kind of helping you guys figure out, how to craft one. Sometimes I feel like people don't even know what necessarily to ask for, what to negotiate for when you're putting one of these together. So we're just going to try to hit all the high points here.
Awesome. Well, feel free to take it away. We'll ask questions if we want, or would you like us to wait until the end?
I'll tell you what, I did a presentation that'll start here in a second. I'm going to try to keep it short. I like to talk a lot. So if I'm talking too much, cut me off. I don't mind. But I figured what I would do, we'll go into it. I'll give you kind of the rundown of how to craft a partnership agreement, what goes into it, what you should be looking out for. And then I'll stop. And then feel free to everyone always has 100 questions about this. So just feel free to just go nuts and just ask away. But I'll try to do the presentation first, and then I'll just let you guys ask whatever I didn't hit maybe enough, or whatever you have more questions about.
So that sounds perfect.
Try to find the share screen here. There it is. I had to maximize it here. Uh-oh. Come on. 1 second. There we go. Okay. And then set the presentation here. Thinking about it. There we go. All right. So everyone see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay. All right. Just making, because I still see me. So it always freaks me out. All right. So we're going to do partnerships in real estate. I'm Bob Floss from Floss Law. Offices up in Northbrook. And so if you need to find me, and I'm all over online. You can find me anywhere. All right. So the main considerations when you're doing a partnership agreement. Number one, we're going to cover capital contributions. Number two, dividing the roles and responsibilities. 3, the profit splits. 4, the voting split. And then we'll talk about planning for future events. So first up is capital contributions. Now, capital contributions typically in the beginning is very easy. So capital contributions essentially is what's the money that everyone's bringing to the table for doing the deal. Sometimes you have a very basic, one person is bringing half the money, the other person is bringing half the money. A lot of times that's not the scenario. Most of the time, I would say the partnership agreements I'm dealing with usually have one person that's more of the money partner and the other person that's more of the labor or day-to-day partner. Now, that also can get skewed a little bit when maybe you have one person that's going to get the mortgage. They're going to be responsible for the mortgage on the property. And then the other person is bringing maybe more money to the table for the actual rehab or something like that. So obviously that's going to skew it a little bit. But you want to keep track of what those capital contributions are coming in. Now, whatever that capital contribution percentage is, maybe one person is bringing in 90%, the other person is bringing in 10% of the money you need. That does not need to match the profit splitting or the voting split. We're going to get to that later. But just know that the money that you bring in doesn't have to match up. It could be staggered in a lot of different ways. Those 3 things, the capital contribution, profit split, and voting split, all 3 of those can be completely separate percentages. They don't have to match up. A lot of times they do, but they don't have to be. We'll get into more complicated scenarios here where they don't have to be matching with each other. No, and like I said, it's not unusual for one person's more the money person, the other person is going to be more of the labor person, especially when we're talking about rehabbing and real estate. A lot of times that's the scenario that we're dealing with. We want to be clear about how to raise additional capital. Now that's where things get way, way more complicated. So when you guys first establish the partnership, you put it together, everyone's throwing the money in the pot, everything's great. That's wonderful. It's at that later date that you either want to say, hey, we all need to throw more money in the pot, or to get even more complicated, if you want to try, if partnership's going well and you want like a 3rd or 4th or 5th person to buy in and they're making additional capital contribution, that's where it gets significantly more complicated. Because whenever you are changing the capital contribution, that changed percentage creates a snowball effect into everything else of the partnership, because that change of capital contribution, now does that have to change the profit split? Does that have to change the voting split? Does that change, a number of other factors in that partnership agreement? So anytime we're dealing with after the partnership's been established, now you got to bring more money in. That really complicates things. And it's always important to remember, when we're dealing with the partnership, we can't create more partnership percentage without taking from someone else. So if we change the percentage of capital contribution, if you're going to go from 50% to 60%, well, that 10% has to come from someone, that we have to take from someone else to give to you. Or if a partner wants to buy into the partnership, in order to give them, let's say, a third or 20% or whatever you're going to do there, we can't create it. It has to come from someone. So we have to subtract someone else's percentage to give them a percentage. It's I know it's very basic, but a lot of people forget this. When we get into that scenario where we're negotiating someone coming into the partnership and everything sounds great because you're getting more money, but then they forget, okay, well, who's going to give up their shares now? Someone's got to give up a percentage to get this new person to the table. And then everyone's kind of looking at each other like, well, you should do it. No one wants to be the person taking the hit. So it's important to remember, the capital contributions initially are going to be very easy. Later on, significantly more complicated. All right. The single.
Hey,
Sorry.
Manny. Hey, no.
Oh,
Hey, Rashid, you're not on mute.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Don't worry about it. The single biggest reasons partnerships fail, at least in real estate, is because they don't define the roles within the partnership. So this is the single most common phone call I get from partners. This is the single biggest problem I have to deal with partners, where I'm trying to kind of talk people down off the ledge, or there's colorful language going on or whatever. Everyone always wants to be the person who finds the deal. Everyone wants to be the money person. Everyone wants to be, the person, that you see on TV that's going and picking out the fixtures and doing all the fun stuff. No one wants to be the person who has to go meet the inspector at the property at Tuesday at 8 a.m. when you got, someone's got to get up and go meet them there. No one wants to be the person that has to go to the property every time the contractor has a question about something, which ends up being nearly every day sometimes. So you need to assign defined roles. The absolute worst thing you can do, and I've seen this when other people, maybe I get involved with litigation with a partnership, and I say, okay, send me the partnership agreement. Let me see what you guys wrote down. And I look at it and it says absolutely nothing. It basically just says, well, everyone's going to contribute, equally. That's a horrible, horrible mistake. You need to define what everyone's responsibilities are. This is not, oh, we're all going to share. No one's sharing anything. When you get involved in the nitty gritty of the day-to-day grind of a partnership, there's no sharing. There needs to be, this is going to be your responsibility, because that's where the fighting starts. So typically you're going to assign one partner that's going to be in charge of the bookkeeping, doing those K1s for when the tax time comes around, because no one really wants to sit down and do those. So someone needs to be in charge of that. Who's going to be the person that's the deal finder? Typically everyone wants to be the deal finder, so that actually has the opposite effect. You want to define who the deal finder is and who the deal finder isn't, because you don't want everyone wasting their energy all trying to be the deal finder. You need to define who that person is, let them do that, and you focus on the other stuff. Who's going to be responsible for the day-to-day oversight of the contractors? That is the number one argument that I get. I get these phone calls all the time. Usually it's the money partner drives by the house. There's no one working at the house. The partner who's supposed to be overseeing the contractors is golfing, and their money's basically burning in the project. So and that's where all the fighting starts. So someone needs to be responsible for going to that property, making sure everything's getting done. And then the marketing, who's going to be the person that's going to pick the realtor or do the property management or, do the rentals, all that kind of stuff. Who's going to be the person assigned to doing that? Assign those roles. If you assign those roles, it makes everything run so much smoother, because then everyone isn't, arguing and trying to, you don't want to have two people doing one thing and no one doing the other thing, which happens if you don't assign these roles to people. That will, if you do that, that's going to prevent a lot of the fighting that I end up seeing with a lot of my partners. So the next comes a profit split. Profit splitting is probably one of the most underutilized and most misunderstood sections of any partnership agreement. And because a lot of people, when they do it themselves, they get something off of Google, whatever, it just says, well, we're going to split the profits 50-50 and everyone's happy and, walk away and everything's great. You can do that. It's fine. You could do a 50-50 split. I would say still 80% of the partnerships I do, everyone still wants to have a 50-50 split. That's generally how everyone wants it to be. I have done some significantly more complicated ones, and I'm pointing this out to you so that it gives you sort of more of a idea of what you can be negotiating for when you're talking to people. So you can obviously stagger those profit splits depending on the capital contribution. Now, that can actually go either way. So you might have the money person say, look, I'm putting up all the cash, you're doing the labor, but I'm putting up all the money for everything. You're putting up zero. So maybe the money guy says, look, I want to have 70% of the profit and you're working for your 30%. It could also go the other way. I've had people say, look, I have a track record. I know what I'm doing. You want to give me money? That's great. You don't want to give me money? I have other people. If you want to do this, we'll do it. You're going to put up all the money. You get 30%. I get 70% because I'm doing all the hard work here. So it could go either way. It depends on how you negotiate, how much experience you have, what track record you have. I've seen that go a lot of different ways. It also, and people, I spelled something wrong there. Apparently I can't spell commercial. Sorry about that. It could go either way when you're talking about residential and commercial too. It's very important to remember that. Some people forget that when you start to make that move up from doing like a single family rehab, now you move up to maybe you're doing 2 flats, now you're doing multifamily. Multifamily is way different when you're negotiating those deals. For one, generally the money person, on a rehab, you're generally just looking for the straight profit. You're buying this thing, there's an end date, there's an exit strategy, you're going to sell this thing. That's it, you're splitting the profit. Great. When you're dealing with multifamily, there's much more of a long-term potential there for the investor. So a lot of times that money person will be willing to take more of a reduction, say on the cost of the money that they're giving you, of the schedule for how they're going to get paid back, things like that. Because generally you're not selling it, you're going to want to keep the property. So there have to be much more of like an exit strategy of, are you going to do a refi, whatever you're going to do. But they're not only going to want to have a split of the profit, but there's going to be a split in perpetuity of those rent collections going forward. So I found that when you're doing something that's more of a multifamily commercial, they're willing to negotiate a little bit because they want the bigger chunk of the long-term profits of that rent collection going forward. So it's different. It's different how you're negotiating those deals. Generally, when you're doing those two, when you're doing a commercial deal, you're probably doing an LLC because you're going to be keeping the property for a long time, I found. But a lot of the things that we're talking about with both the LLC and the partnership intertwine with each other. A lot of them overlap. And also it's important to think about, some people want, straight 50-50, 60-40, 70-30. Some people would prefer, in order to have more of a transparent schedule, that we actually have a fee schedule broken into, the partnership agreement, instead of just saying, all right, we're going to have whatever the expenses are, and then whatever the profit is at the end of the day, we're splitting that up. They may say, so that we don't have any misconceptions, and particularly when you're dealing with a more expensive property where both the rehab and the closing costs are going to be very high. They would rather break into the partnership agreement. Okay, well, you're going to collect these fees up front, and these are going to be part of the closing costs. And then after that, we're going to split whatever the leftover profit is. So some people may want to have, and I've done these before, say, look, when I find the deal, I want, a 0.5% or 1% of the purchase price as the deal finding fee for me at that closing. Or same thing when you sell. Say when we sell this property, I want, a 1% fee on the sale of it. Or, if you're going to have an ongoing property where you're going to be doing property management, you might say, look, I want it built in that every year I'm going to get, a 1% of whatever the gross rent collected as a fee on the top for management. And then an ongoing, every month, 6% property management fee ongoing. And then that's built in as one of the hard costs. And then whatever's left over, the net profit, that's what we're going to split. So it could be a very valuable thing because it allows the person who's doing more of the labor end or the day-to-day operations to be very clear on what their expectations of what they're going to receive. And it also is very good for the money partners because then they have a very clear schedule. They know exactly what to expect. There's no surprises, and they can see, okay, you're going to get this, you're going to get this. That's great. I want to make sure you get paid so that you have a benefit for having more profit for me on the back end. Because what you don't want to do is have a partnership where one person has the benefit of trying to deplete the profits. And I think that's my next slide here. Yes. So what you want to avoid, and I get this too, this unfortunately can happen very often, the rehab trap. So when you have someone that maybe is newer or, maybe doesn't know how to do a rehab or is, have only done a couple, you can run into this scenario where either intentionally or unknowingly, and that's where a big argument could come in is, did you know you were doing this or did you not know that you were doing this? You can over improve a property. It's not hard if you've been around real estate for a while. It's not hard to unfortunately over improve a property. You buy a foreclosure, something like that, and you get a little crazy with the rehab and you reach a critical point where you're putting money into the property that you're now not going to get back out. You're not increasing value at the same rate that you're putting money into the property. You need to be mindful of that. It's not, there's probably the biggest gripe I have about these, rehab TV shows. They just spend an unlimited amount of money and somehow it always ends up great in the end. That's not how it works. If you spend too much money, you're depleting your profits. So what happens is the partner who's in charge of the rehab, let's say in the ideal scenario, which is a scenario one, you're spending 60 grand on the rehab. Your after rehab value is about 300K. When you get all done with closing costs and everything, they're splitting $40,000. So let's say in this scenario, one person gets 20, the other person gets 20. Scenario two is where the rehabber gets out of control. Now the rehabber spent 100,000 on the house, but they've only increased the ARV by 10 grand. They spent 40 grand to make an additional 10 grand. So now the profit is only $10,000. Now they're only splitting 5 and 5. Now where the issue can come in, where things can get really hairy is, did the person in charge of the rehab not know that? They just got crazy with buying, really fancy tile, and then they bought the really, the high-end fixtures and went way overboard when they needed to dial it back for the neighborhood they're in. Or and this is where things get really messy, did the rehabber know, if I jack up all the bids and I tell the contractors, look, you run up your bid 5 grand and then you kick me back half, or you run up your bid 5 grand on this house, and then on my other project that I got going on, I want you to knock 5 grand off that one, so I make more money on my other house. That's, you need to be careful of the that partner depleting the profit sharing by jacking up the part where they make money on those rehab costs. So that's, I get unfortunately, a lot of litigation on that one. So we got to be careful of that. And then voting split. The voting split generally is going to be 50-50, especially when you're doing with a partnership. Most of the time, very rarely is it ever off 50-50. It certainly makes things easier for me if it's a 51-49, so that you don't have, reach a point where you can't make a decision. But generally, people want 50-50, and I understand that. I get the reasoning for wanting to do that. If you have an odd number of partners, that makes my life a lot easier too. If there's 3 of you, then there's an automatic tiebreaker built in. We don't have to worry about it. But if we do have an even number of partners, we have 2, 4, 6, whatever. Particularly if you have 2, if you're straight 50-50. Now we have to make sure we put this provision in there. We could call it the Russian roulette or the Texas shootout provision. What happens there is, if you reach an impasse where the 2 of you just can't reach an agreement on anything, the partnership's basically reached a moment where you no longer can move forward as a partnership. You just don't agree on what to do about a property. You don't agree on to do the rehab or not do the rehab or what. I've had a bunch of different reasons that this has happened, but basically you have two partners that completely disagree about handling either a partnership or an investment or a property, whatever the case may be. Here's how this happens. It's a very simple provision we put in there. This has worked very well over the years. You have the initiating partner. The initiating partner says, look, I want to buy you out. Here's the offer. I'll give you X amount of money to buy out your half of the partnership. The receiving partner now has one of two choices. Choice one is accept the offer, take the money and get bought out for your half. Option two is you could turn it around and you can say, your offer, I like it so much that I'm going to turn that offer back around on you and I'm going to buy you out for the same term sheet that you just gave me. Now we do it that way because that prevents one person from giving a lowball offer to the other to try to do a forced buyout. So if you know the partnership's worth $1 million and half should be worth 500, the other half should be worth 500, and the person says, look, I'll give you 100 grand, you take it or leave it. You could turn around and say, that sounds great. I'll buy you out for the 100 grand. It basically prevents someone from trying to push someone out with a lowball offer. It gives you, it puts both partners on an equal playing field so that whoever is going to get bought out is going to get bought out for a fair number. All right. And then planning for future events. This is probably one of the biggest things that I have to work on when I'm working on someone's partnership agreement, is making sure we have everything built in there. When I get people's partnership agreements that they did where they took something off of online, it's 2 pages long. The partnership, I've been working on partnership agreements for 12 years now. I just keep adding things and adding things and adding things. I think my partnership agreement's like 30 pages now. It's ridiculous. But that's the whole point, is I'm trying to prepare for every possible scenario that can come up. The time to deal with a difficult situation is not when you're already in the conflict. When you're in the conflict is not the time to figure out how to handle the conflict. We figure that out ahead of time. We come up with what the game plan is going to be. Then when you find yourself in that horrible situation, when you find yourself in that conflict, we already have the game plan set out. There's nothing to figure out. It's already in there. Here's what we're going to do, A, B, C, D, and there's nothing to worry about. We've already kind of planned ahead for this. So what are things that we have to deal with? What happens if one of the partner dies? What happens if one of the partner has to file bankruptcy? What happens if one of the partners gets arrested? And then sometimes even then, okay, how do we break that out? Is the arrest for DUI? Is the arrest for they committed fraud? Is the arrest for, what did they get arrested for? If they get divorced, how do we handle that? If they're a defendant in a lawsuit, is the partnership going to be responsible for paying any of the legal fees depending on what the lawsuit is over? Is it related to something in the partnership or completely unrelated to it? All of those different scenarios. So we just keep crafting all of these things so that whenever an event happens like this, we have everything built out in there. And then I think that's my last slide. All right. Let me get back on my mug. There we go. All right. So there's a presentation. What happened to me? Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bob.
Yeah, no problem. So I kind of went over all the basics there. Now comes the questions. Now everyone's on mute. Okay.
All right, I can ask one. What are like the common characteristics you see between partnerships or partners that last the longest or like are the most successful?
Honestly, the best partnerships are the ones where they really do have the defined roles established. As long as they have those defined roles, really is the biggest key to having a long-standing partnership, and also no animosity between the two partners. I mean, it's really not uncommon for partners to do work together, but then also they might have other things going on. They might have their own investments on the side. They might have a different partnership. They start with someone else. if you're like, well, screw you, why are you doing stuff with this other guy or this other girl or whatever, and then the partnership breaks apart. I've seen partnerships last a long time where they're like, look, if you want to do stuff with other people, that's fine. Just don't, ignore whatever projects we have going together. Just make sure we keep, you keep holding up your obligations with me. As long as everything's going smooth with my stuff, I don't care what you do with other people. If you want to, that's fine. It doesn't matter to me. Or, if you want to do a project on your own, although generally the reason people go into partnerships is it's hard to do it on your own. It helps to have another person involved with it. I would say there's someone in the chat room here. I would say on average, I do have some partnerships that have been going for, a good 10, 15 years. It's not unusual. I would say a partnership on average now. Generally you can have a really good run of about maybe 3 to 5 years. And 3 to 5 years, generally one or two of the people decide that they either want to do something different, or to be quite honest, I get a lot of people, they just get burnt out from real estate, unfortunately. Doing rehab particularly can be a bit of a grind. And sometimes one of the partners is like, look, I got to take a break for a little while and I'll come back, but I need some time to just spend with my family. We get people who, they just have a good run, and then they just, for whatever reason, maybe they have a really, really good niche that they figured out, and then the niche kind of runs dry. We saw that a lot with, I had a lot of people that were doing really, really good with short sales. Well, then the short sales stopped, and it was like, okay, well, now you have to come up with a new business plan because your business model kind of dried out because there's no short sales anymore. So stuff like that happens. Where it's like, all right, I'm going to just kind of regroup and figure out what my new game plan is going to be because this isn't working anymore, things like that. So it happens very naturally a lot of times. It doesn't always result in fighting. It's just kind of the market changes, so then you have to change and you develop a new strategy or whatever. And sometimes that involves doing different partners, so it's but I have people that particularly if you do like a rental strategy, like a long-term hold, it keeps going. It's it works well for what it is. All right, we have someone in
Hi,
the
Bob.
chat that has a partnership question for multifamily.
Hi, Bob. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Hey, Bob. How are you?
Good.
Bob, so yeah, I think I enjoyed the presentation you had. And I had a question. You mentioned about, a couple of very important things which I have experienced in the past. One, it's a little bit more complex, if not difficult, to come up with a partnership agreement for a buy and hold long-term investment, correct? Compared to coming up with a partnership agreement for either a flip or a new construction that has a 1 to 2 year exit strategy in place from, if it's a new construction, I buy a land, I build on it for 9 months, I can list it, and it typically sells within 12. If not, it's I refi for 3 months at a time, and eventually does sell, correct? Similar for a flip, correct, with a shorter time period. Now, what challenge I am facing is, in the past 2.5 years, I've been working with a lot of different investors that are busy professionals that basically are capital partners, correct? Yes. Meaning, and how I have done businesses, in order to keep things very simple and black and white, correct? They bring the capital. Basically, they are private money lenders, correct? So that's not really, it's a different kind of partnership. But now the challenge I'm facing is, when I do a private money lending deal, when I was doing it for the past 2.5 years, these were predominantly single family homes and 2 to 4 units, correct? Meaning the loan amount, the biggest loan I took was a 200K loan, correct? So the loan amount would be smaller, correct? Now, what I'm trying to do is, and I used to give them a first mortgage on the property. So basically, if you lend me 200K, I would give you a very high interest rate, correct, for 6 to 9 months, and I would give you a first mortgage on the property, a first lien on the property, correct? So I would give you a promissory note, I'll give you a mortgage, I'll give you, I think assignment of rents that gets recorded at the Cook County Recorder of Deeds, and everything is, everything is good. Now, what I'm trying to do is on multifamily, on bigger properties, 12 units to 50, I am getting the same 200K loan from, let's say, Joe, correct? Instead of using it for purchase and rehab, I go to a bank, I tell them, hey man, I have this, a 1 million project or 800K project, and you give me 75%, 75% debt, and the balance 25% equity I'll take. The bank doesn't care, but what I'm trying to do is the private money lender funds the 25% of the total project, meaning the purchase and acquisition, correct?
Yeah.
Now the private lender asked me, hey, I won't be getting a first lien on the property because the bank is getting one, correct? So how do I structure these kind of, because now it gets into more of a partnership thing, because they will ask me, hey, you are taking a 1 year to a 2 year loan because it's a bigger project, there are more moving parts, how about you give me an equity in the project, and a fixed, like a pref rate, like typically how syndication are structured, so how would you structure this kind of scenario?
I'm going to have several comments about that. So first of all, to get to the part you just left off on, typically with a scenario like that, generally we're looking at something where you're going to be buying the property into an LLC if possible, especially if you're doing like a commercial loan. I don't know what kind of loan you're getting, but if you're doing a commercial loan, typically you're going to do an LLC. And then that person who's contributing the money is going to be on that LLC and will have a percentage membership in that. That's the most common scenario we deal with in that, because a lot of times they're, like we said, they're putting up the money, but really they know that they're going to get paid back the money at some point when you do a refi or whatever you're going to do at a later date. But really what they want is that rental income over the long term. So they're basically buying in so they can get, 40% of the rental returns for, hopefully the 20, 30 years. They're planning on you owning this property for a very, very long time. So they want that rental income for that whole period of time. Now, typically I found that people who do that want to see two things. They want to see that they're going to have that ownership interest where they get that rental income, but they also still want to see some sort of exit strategy for their money. So typically they're giving you that money, but they want to see something in maybe like a 3 to 5 year time frame of how you're going to either make like improvements, improve the rental flow so that you increase the value of the property, then do a refi and then give them their money back. So the intention is not for them to give you this money and it stays in there forever. Usually the intention is, I'm giving you this money now, you're going to give me my money back maybe in 3 to 5 years, and I'm still going to get the rental percent, I'm still going to get 20, 30, 40% of the rental for the next 20 years. So those two separate things happen. One thing you did bring up at the very beginning that I'd like to point out for anyone who's new to putting together a deal like what he's talking about, people always worry about running into securities. Having a private investor, someone who wants to partner with you, but maybe you're worried about, running into any issues with the security, something like that. Generally, we can avoid all of that by doing what he's saying, having a private mortgage on the property. So if you know someone that wants to give you money, you're worried about anything like that, the simplest way to avoid any of those issues is just say, look, give me the 200K, and you can charge me however many points and whatever percentage you want to negotiate for them. Do a private mortgage. We record that mortgage on the property, and now it's not a security. Now they're a mortgage on the property. You don't have to worry about it running any security issues with that. Now, the other way you avoid any security issue is if you have them in a partnership or an LLC and you give them something to do. You have to give them some sort of a role within the LLC, then it also avoids it. What you don't want to do is do some sort of like an LLC, they put up the money and you handle everything. You can't do that. And then you're running close to a security issue. You got to give them something to do, or I did a lot of this probably about maybe 5-6 years ago. I did a ton of deals where a lot of people were buying up commercial down in like Bronzeville, Bronzeville, Kenwood, areas like that where stuff was really cheap at that time. Everyone was buying. There was a big run on commercial properties down there. A lot of it we did private mortgages. That was the easiest. People wanted to put up the money. We did a ton of those down there. So go ahead. Sorry.
Bob, just so that when you do a private mortgage, the bank has the first lien. So I think you're talking about a second mortgage on the property, correct?
Well, I was talking about just doing I had a lot of people that did first. Now you're talking about doing a second. Then that's the next part of the conversation. That gets a little more complicated. So obviously you can still record the second on there. There should be something in there about a subordination that they understand there's a first mortgage, they're going to be the second mortgage on the property. And you're welcome to record it, but I found that most private investors, they sort of feel like it's worthless at that point. They're like, look, if something goes wrong and I have to foreclose, then the first is going to foreclose. I'm walking away with nothing. So at that point, they really don't even care if you record or not, to be quite honest with you. I've had some ask me to record. I've had some are like, I don't know, what difference does it make? Who cares? So really it becomes the weight of both the promissory note and when someone's knowingly is taking a second position on a project with you, very heavily weighs on both your reputation and how much they trust you that you're going to make sure that they get paid back. I coach people on doing private investments. That's a whole separate thing I can do. I think when we're at the summit, I think I did a whole thing about private investments. The number one thing whenever you're doing any private investment like this is and I represent sometimes private investors when I'm putting together this package, and they always tell me the number one thing that they want to know above all others, they don't really even care, to be honest with you, whether the project makes money or loses money. They want to know at the end of the day, if S hits the fan, you're going to make sure that you get them paid back. That's their primary concern. And there's a lot of people that will take money from private investors and leave them high and dry. We talked at the very beginning. Unfortunately, I have a lot of litigation I'm working on right now. I have an unprecedented number of litigation cases I'm working on of people who lent money to someone to do a project and then just basically stopped returning phone calls, hasn't communicated with them, and they have no idea what's going on in the project, and they have no idea where their money is. You can't do that. The investors have to know first and foremost, where's my money at and what's the status of the project. If the project is going bad or you're having problems, just communicate that with them. They're fine with that. To be honest with you, most of the clients I represent say, look, if you're losing money, just tell me so I know where the money's at, but don't just ignore me and I have no idea what's going on. So that's why I have a lot of litigation with that, where people just, they kind of like are, a turtle with, their head in the shell trying to ignore it. And it's like, you're going to have to deal with this. You took this guy's money. You have to figure out how you're going to pay him back or sell the property. You can't just sit there. I get, fortunately, a lot of people who just sit there with the property and do nothing. It's like, you got to have a plan, man. What are you doing with the property? So I guess I'm giving you the long-winded version of whoever's giving you that second on the property, they have to trust you. There's really no added security you're going to give them. The only additional thing you could possibly do is, again, we go back to if you either have a partnership agreement with them named in the partnership agreement, or you do an LLC and they're named as a member of the LLC where they have some rights to the property. And thankfully, a lot of the time when I'm doing litigation, it's because they do have a partnership agreement. And based on case law, if you're a partner on the property, you have a personal property right. We could do a dissolution of the partnership and you could do a forced liquidation of the assets, AKA the property. So it's not really a foreclosure. We're doing a forced liquidation of the partnership, meaning we're telling the judge, we need you to force the sale of the property so the person can get their money back. So obviously we don't want to have to go to those lengths to do that. At the end of the day, when you're dealing with this scenario you're talking about with the second mortgage, they have to trust you that you're going to pay them back. That's the end result. They have to believe in you and your track record. They're going to make sure that you're going to get them their money back.
So just for the sake of clarification there, Bob. So if let's say Sean's bringing in that guy who's bringing in, $200,000, let's say it's $1 million acquisition.
Okay.
The private investors coming in at $200,000 to cover that 20% down payment.
Mhm.
So that 20% down payment, the person who's providing that you would open up a secondary mortgage representing their contribution on the property.
Well, you basically just prepare a mortgage, treating the investor as though they were Chase Bank or anything like that. You just prepare a mortgage that says, that you're lending me 200K. It's you do the promissory note like you would like when you're closing on a house or anything else. That investor has a promissory note from them lending you the money, the promise to repay them. And then a mortgage, we prepare the private mortgage just instead of a bank, it has the person's name or their company name. And then if something goes wrong, they can then foreclose on it. Now, the problem again still is if they're a second, they're really not in a position to initiate any kind of foreclosure. So then it becomes a trust issue. If you're in the first position, obviously that makes it a lot easier.
Now, is this similar if someone wanted to do a seller carry instead of bringing in private capital? Let's say you work a deal out with the actual seller of the property, and say, would you do seller financing for that 20% down?
Yeah, and I've done those too. So you could do a seller financing, and instead of you could do it a number of different ways, but I've done it where the seller, we actually create a mortgage for the seller of the property. So you're paying the full purchase price, and it kind of looks a little funky when you're doing it, but it works like a normal transaction. It just looks weird that you're sort of recirculating the same money where you're paying the purchase price to the seller, and then the seller's turning around and we're generating a private mortgage to you from the seller. You could do it that way. It looks a little funky. Sometimes the title companies are like, but it works. It works. It's just the math's a little funny sometimes because you're basically turning around the same money. I also want to point out real quick, as a matter of practicality, what you're talking about doing with the 20%, we used to do that a lot. I've noticed lately, make sure you check with your lender about that, because lately the lenders have really tightened up on that. So I just want to refresh so everyone's on the same page. What he's talking about is you go to a commercial lender and you say, I'm going to buy this building for $1 million. I want a loan for $800,000 and I'm going to put $200,000 down. But what he's really doing, and there's nothing wrong with doing this. We've done this a ton, where you are personally responsible for signing that mortgage with the lender for the 800, but now you have a private investor that's going to come in and they're going to give you the 200 grand to use as the down payment. We can craft those deals all day. However, I've had several partners come back to me and say that the lenders are tightening up that sort of loan package, that they don't feel comfortable. If you're the person who's responsible for signing this $800,000 mortgage, why don't you have the 200 grand? Because if we're lending you this 800 grand, it's under the guise that you are able to pay this loan and that you were going to have the 200 grand, not that your buddy was going to have the 200 grand. So I have had some pushback from some of the lenders saying, look, we're not going to give you this loan. I've had a couple fall apart in the fourth quarter. They said, look, if you're not the one putting up the money, we're not giving you this loan. This is not what we agreed to do. So some of the lenders are, because of everything that's going on, some of the commercial lenders really got squirrely on us in this last year. I mean, if you tried to close any commercial deals in 2020, some of the commercial lenders got pretty crazy on us as far as really pulling back what we could do as far as getting a loan. And it got much more difficult. One of the things they did was they really cut off anyone trying to get a different party to come in and contribute that money. Now, you can still make those deals work, but you need to put together the partnership agreement or LLC operating agreement ahead of time. Send it to the underwriter. The underwriter's got to approve that operating agreement. And if that private person that's coming in contributing, if they're over I think it's 10%, if they have more of 10% of that partnership or operating agreement, they're going to want to see their financials. They're going to say, great, you're giving 40% of the LLC. This person is giving you the 200 grand. Here's the loan application. That guy's got to go fill it out now because we need to see what his finances look like before he comes and brings that money to the table and we clear you on, give you the clear to close on this loan. So make sure you're communicating with your lenders, telling them. You can't surprise them. We used to be able to, Unfortunately, we used to be able to surprise them at the closing table with this stuff, and they would make it fly before. You can't surprise them anymore. You got to tell them about this stuff ahead of time, and they have to clear it with the underwriter, or you're going to get to the closing table, and you're potentially going to lose earnest money because the lender's going to pull you out. And you pull the rug out from under you at the closing table and say, this is not what we agreed to. We didn't say you could bring all the money from someone else. You're supposed to have the money. So just be careful, communicate with your lenders.
Yeah, Bob, I've gone through that process, correct?
Okay.
So 50% of commercial lenders do not want a subordinate mortgage, meaning that when you sign the loan documents, there is a due on sale clause, and the second mortgage actually constitutes, kind of like you are selling the property, you're selling, some portion of the. So yeah, it doesn't now. What folks I think have done in the past, they do get a second mortgage, they just don't record it at the Cook County Recorder of Deeds, meaning it's kept with the attorney that, hey, if something goes south, you can file this, you can get a lien against the property if things go south. Correct. The other thing you talked about, LLC, which I think I had more pushback from the banks. They say that, anyone with having more than 25% ownership in the LLC needs to sign all the loan documents, meaning that now he is actually, basically a loan guarantor along with the working capital partner. And usually the private money lenders do not want to sign the bank loan documents because they are not, actively involved in the deal. All they care about is a fixed interest rate. They don't, which they would want, a double digit return basically for the capital invested, correct? They don't want to be bothered by either the bank, but by the day-to-day operations, and then B, signing the loan documents, because then their credit is on the hook if things go south. Now they not even lose money, but then the bank can, so they can get hit by. So private money lenders typically don't like the LLC concept because then they have to sign, the loan documents and all that crazy stuff.
It depends on what lender you go to, because you're saying 25%. A deal I had fall apart, it was as low as 10%. So it really depends on what lender you go to. Some lenders also don't care too. So you got to just make sure you're shopping around and communicating what you're trying to do, and they'll tell you. I found commercial lenders are very straightforward. They'll tell you give them the scenario and they'll be like, yeah, we do that, or they'll just say there's no way we're going to do that deal, and they'll just they'll be very honest with you about what they can or can't do, because generally they know exactly what products they have or don't have in a particular time. But it also is good to communicate with them, because if you tell them exactly what you're trying to do, they might not have anything for you now, but they might have something in the future. I've had that happen too, where a lender will come back to an investor 6 months later, and they're like, hey, remember that thing you were trying to do? I can do that deal now. If you find a property, you put that deal together, I can underwrite that right now. So it's good. Networking is good for that. Sometimes they'll come back and tell you like, hey, we can do that deal now if you got one.
Yeah. Bob, have you done any syndication agreements in the past on bigger projects?
Here's the thing with I'm always very upfront with people about everyone wants to do a syndication. Here's the deal. My 30-second spiel I give you a syndication is, can we do them? Yes, absolutely. I have a lot of experience with syndications, but I'll be honest with you. The vast majority, the overwhelming vast majority of real estate deals I put together, we usually end up telling them, you don't want to do a syndication. Everyone thinks they want to do a syndication. They really just need to do an LLC and structure things properly. A lot of times you don't need to go through the expense of doing the syndication. The other realistic obstacle is there's very few properties in the Chicagoland area that are big enough to warrant doing a syndication. So usually when you look at a syndication, it's these huge complexes in Ohio, Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia. We just don't have anything here big enough to warrant doing it, unless you're going to buy, a high rise in downtown Chicago, but you're not going to do a syndication necessarily for something like that. So typically when you're doing a syndication, you're doing these apartment housing complexes that are just massive. You have 800 to 1,000 rental units, maybe even bigger. We don't have anything that big here. We really don't. So most of the time, if someone comes to me and they say, hey, I want to do this deal on this apartment building that's, 48 units for, 2 million. I'll go, great, we could just do an LLC for that. You don't need to do a syndication. Why are you spending the money on a syndication? You don't need to. If you're going to do a $50 million deal, yeah, absolutely, we're going to do a syndication on that. If you're doing a $2 million deal, you really don't need to do a syndication for that. It's just not necessary. If you got 3 guys for a 48 unit building for $2 million, why do you need a syndication? It's just, so most of the time, those are scenarios I get. People say, oh, I want to do a syndication. And I say, okay, how many people, do you think are going to be in? 4. You don't need a
Partnership.
syndication for 4
Yeah.
people. So
Correct.
it's just, I hate, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I'm just trying to say a lot of times people think they need that. They don't really need that. They'll already know who the investors are going to be. They already know that they have this pool of private investors. Well, if you already know, you could just put together, a partnership or an operating agreement. The whole idea of the syndication is you're trying to recruit people to bring in the money. If it's your group or your buddies and you're all just putting it together, then just put together the partnership agreement. You're not trying to go out and recruit people for the money. It's generally, the other part of syndication is you're going to have, 100 people, for something that complicated. Yes, you're going to need to syndicate it. But again, you're not going to recruit 50 people to invest in a $2 million project. You don't need to.
Yeah.
It's just unnecessary.
Yeah. But Bob, even how I have seen syndications being structured in the past. I'm working on 2 syndications, one in Florida, one in Texas.
Exactly.
Correct. We do end up having 2 sets of LLCs. One is LLC for the GPs with 30% equity.
Mhm.
The other LLC is owned by all the limited partners. But
Sure.
one thing I still don't understand, tomorrow if things go south, none of the LPs have any security, because they are all part of one different LLC, and GPs are part of a different LLC. So if things go south, the bank would foreclose on the property, correct? The limited partners would lose all the money they have invested, correct? And typically the exit is minimum 5 years. It's a 5 to 8 year hold.
Yeah, minimum.
So what
Yeah.
security do these Grant Cardones and these big multi-billionaires now, what security does a limited partner have on a syndication is something I've not got an answer from anyone yet.
That's twofold. One is obviously you hope that when you enter it, usually a syndication doesn't have, unless there are some syndications where you're going in with a value add opportunity. The vast majority of syndications are going to be basically, we're going to buy this asset and just maintain it. We might add a little bit of value, but it's really just the maintaining of the asset. So the underlying asset should hold the value where, if everything goes wayside, you should still be able to potentially liquidate and those partners receive, some, if not, hopefully most of their investment back. The second part of that is if they do potentially lose a significant amount of money, or potentially all of their money, it really, is there anything that person can do to recover? No. And I've had a couple of those. I had a few people who, I don't want to say what group, but I had some people that contributed money to a group where they pretty much were at a total loss. I had a guy in Texas that lost $700,000. He gave him $700,000. It was gone. It was poof. It was gone.
Boy.
Because of a poor running of an investment strategy, actually based in Chicago. But the second part of that is if you're someone who's like, Grant Cardone's been in the news a lot lately for doing a lot of syndication stuff like that. The ramifications are more, remember we talked about when you're doing a second mortgage, you're doing any of these things, it's trust. Once you break that trust, it's very hard to raise additional capital. So if one of these guys does these syndication deals and they screw everybody and it goes by the wayside, good luck ever trying to do one of those again. I mean, so that's more the ramification for the person operating. It's over. You're done. You're not going to do another one of these. No one's going to, give you additional capital for any other projects. You have to find something else to do because you're not going to find any additional money. If you go that big and you screw over that many investors, your goodwill within the investment community is pretty much tarnished at that point. So it's much more of a ramification for them where they're now out as far as what their career is going to be. Obviously it can have huge ramifications for you as the investor as a loss of your the money that you contributed, but a syndication if you're concerned about that, I would be concerned about you investing in the syndication, because generally I found that a syndication has a very stable asset. A syndication generally is not a risky asset. It's a very, very stabilized asset, where you're just buying this apartment building and you're basically going to go in, hopefully improve operations, maybe do a couple of capital projects, and that's kind of it. It should be a very, it's kind of, it should be pretty vanilla. It shouldn't be too risky.
Sure. And I think that's why most of these syndications, I don't think it's the unit size. I think because Illinois is not a business friendly state, especially for landlords, all kinds of businesses. No syndicator wants to, invest in Illinois, or a state that is tenant friendly, Illinois, New York, California. They want to invest in more business friendly, more landlord friendly environments like Texas and Florida, because they want to protect investor capital, correct? But now something like COVID happens and an eviction moratorium that might go for almost 2 years. Most of these syndicators get screwed if they have bought at a price that was overvalued to begin with, and now something like an eviction moratorium happens, which is across the country. Now it's Texas. If they stop paying, you can't do anything, correct? It's Illinois. It's the same problem. So that is the trend I've been seeing in the past 1 year. A lot of syndicators have gone belly up, and now the banks can't foreclose because so it's a big problem. And I think towards the end of the year, we'll see a lot of pre-foreclosures, a lot of shorts happening on these bigger assets. Because
all right, guys,
these
I'm just gonna interrupt here real quick. We have 5 minutes left before our breakout sessions. So just want to do 1 minute last call if anyone else has any questions.
I have a question here, Chris. Do you mind if I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is that I've heard the laws in many forums that when people have partners, how they ensure both partners have skin in the game. Like, I've heard of a lot of these partnerships. I'm going to bring the money. You're a contractor, you're going to do the rehab. But then in the end, I've heard that also the contractor doesn't have that much interest. If he's getting paid, he has his work, but if he has more important work, he's going to switch to that and ignore this project. What are the clauses that will ensure skin in the game? Is it just money? So now, regardless of he's doing rehab and you're doing the money, he has to put some money to ensure he will never, give up on the project, or there is any clauses to ensure both parties will lose actually if they don't pay enough attention.
There's always going to be risk with any partnership. There's always going to be a little bit of risk. I guess it depends on how you structure it with the person that's the contractor end. So if the contractor is expected to do the rehab portion and be out of pocket for the expenses for the rehab portion, then obviously they have skin in the game. So there's a couple of different ways you could do that. I mean, you could say, look, I'm going to put up all the money for buying the property, and now it's your responsibility to pay to get the materials to get the work going. Or you could say, look, I'll give you the out-of-pocket expenses for the materials only, but you're responsible for the labor, and you're going to have to wait until we sell it in order to recoup your labor costs. You do something like that. But what I think what you're talking about is sometimes the money person really ends up just paying for everything. They're 100% out of pocket, and the contractor can kind of, they come and go as they please, and it can be very hard to control them. And then it becomes a very difficult scenario. And, if some people think that it's an easy thing to just say, okay, we'll just fire the contractor and hire a new one. Like that sounds great in practice, but when you're halfway through a project, firing a contractor and hiring a new one is a disaster. It could be a complete disaster. Number one, you lose a lot of time. You lose a lot of money because now the new contractor, generally their bid's not going to match up. You're going to lose a lot of your profits by hiring a new one. There's a lot of lost time too. I mean, the whole process of deciding to fire the contractor, then fire them, hire a new one, you could lose months on that, months. And God forbid if they pulled a permit, if the old contractor pulled a permit, now the new contractor is not going to put their name on a permit with half the work that they didn't do. So that's a whole different scenario then. That's a whole disaster scene then. So you really have to be committed to the contractor. And what you're saying is true. A lot of times the contractors kind of, you know, I've for 12 years I've been trying to figure it out and I still can't. These guys will just disappear for like 2 weeks at a time. You're thinking, where are you? Please just tell me where you are. Can you come to my house? So the way you could combat that is any number of the scenarios, you know, telling, I've had people put the contractor on or the partner doing the rehab on a schedule, say, okay, look, every time you get up to 5 grand or 10 grand out of pocket, you give me the receipts, I recoup you the 5 grand or 10 grand. So it keeps them, you know, sort of, they're spending money out of pocket. So it keeps them vested in the project. Or like, you know, the schedule, like I was saying, okay, anything you need to order supplies, I'll pay for, but I'm not paying you for labor. The labor you collect on the back end of it. You gotta have some vested interest in this project. So I've done that any number of ways. Any other different way of doing it, to be honest with you, at that point, then if you're putting up all the money and the contractor's just there doing the work, I mean, is the contractor really then a partner? Is the contractor just the contractor? They're really not a partner then. So there needs to be some sort of ramifications for them to be involved in the deal. You know, they have to do something more than just being the contractor or have some sort of liability. Otherwise, they're not really a partner then. There's really no point in doing it. So there does need to be some sort of okay, you know, what's your liability here? Because that's ultimately the issue we have with contractors a lot of times is they have zero responsibility, zero liability. And if they don't like how things are going, they just disappear. And now you're left hanging. So the difference between them being a GC and them being a partner is some liability connecting them to the project.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions, guys? All right. We're going to go ahead and go into breakout rooms now. Bob, you're welcome to stay. Otherwise, I know if you're busy today, you're more than welcome to sign off. But we just want to say that we really appreciate your time coming by today on Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely.
And presenting for us.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Would you be willing to share that presentation with us afterward?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, thank you.
No
All
problem.
right. And I guess best way to contact you real quick, if I'll type it in the chart here.
I mean, flosslaw.com. You can find me on Facebook. I have a YouTube channel. I haven't posted anything on the YouTube channel in a while, but I have a YouTube channel. My office is in Northbrook. You can find my info, you know, bob@flosslaw.com. I'm really good with email. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email. And happy to help you guys. You know, obviously I do a lot of real estate related things. I also want to remind people, everyone always calls me when they have a problem. I do just nice, normal real estate closings too. So just throw that out there. I have a tendency to get everyone's problems. I do nice, boring real estate closings too. I like those too.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Bob.
you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and we got time for one breakout session today. We'll probably keep it at 10 minutes. I'll go ahead and assign you guys right now.